It's a cliche to say in security that privacy and security don't always play together. But fortunately, we have an excellent panel up next to highlight exactly how privacy and security can play with each other, and in fact, how the privacy tech community can learn from the security world. And so if you're interested in either of them, please follow this panel. So we've got a great group here. We've got Lourdes Turrecha, who is the founder and CEO of Pix. We've got Michelle Dennedy, who's the Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer at Cisco. And of course, many of you know Melanie Ensign, who's the founder of Discernible, and she spent a lot of time thinking about the communication side of how we help users for Facebook and Uber and AT&T. So this panel really is going to capture this dynamic of how do we think about privacy from an innovation perspective and what lessons we can build from security. So really looking forward to this panel and make sure that there's some insights that we can all glean from.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to BSides Las Vegas 2021. I'm really excited to be here. In this session, we're going to talk about some of the lessons that we've learned in the cybersecurity industry and that we're transferring to the emerging privacy tech landscape. We'll start with speaker intros. Melanie and I will do our brief spiel of what we're doing currently in privacy and security. Then we'll do some baseline definitions of what privacy is, what privacy tech is, how does it intersect with security, how is it the same and how is it different? And then we'll dig into some of those lessons before we wrap up. And so, Melanie, you want to go ahead with introductions and I'll follow you?
Sure. Thanks so much, Lourdes. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Melanie Ensign. I am the founder and CEO of a security and privacy communications consultancy called Discernible. We are about coming up on our 18-month mark as a company, so very excited about the first year that we've had. Thank you. Previously, I led security, privacy, and engineering communications for Uber. I have done security communications for Facebook and AT&T and a couple of other companies in my previous consulting life as well. And I also run the press department for DEF CON, which is probably happening right now as you're watching this. So really excited to be here. My comments and insights today will really be focused on how we communicate around the issues of security and privacy and the lessons that we've learned from security that are applicable to the emerging space of privacy tech.
Thanks, Mel. And I'm Lourdes Turrecha. I'm the founder of the Rise of Privacy Tech, which has its mission of fueling privacy innovation. And just by the way, Melanie is also an advisor to us at the Rise of Privacy Tech. What we do with our mission to fuel privacy innovation, we try to do this by bridging the tech capital expertise gaps in this space. We try to bring together founders, investors, and experts in privacy tech. I've also worked with InfoSec teams and in InfoSec teams trying to build privacy functions within them or alongside them, and also have worked with cybersecurity companies and now focusing mostly with privacy tech startups. Well, Mel, to kick this off, I think it's important for us to talk about definitions so that we don't talk past each other and try to just have those baseline, definitions of what we're even talking about. So when you talk to someone, a journalist, for instance, or someone who's not within privacy and security, and when trying to talk about different solutions and trying to avoid any misunderstanding, how do you define privacy versus security? How do they intersect? How are they different? Obviously, those two are well-defined domains, but it's also, sometimes it's important to kind of put it in 8-year-old terms when you talk to folks who aren't from the industry.
Yeah, and truthfully, when I'm talking to folks who aren't in this space, a lot of times the person who has to adjust is me. in terms of how I talk about it, because a lot of the stakeholders that I'm talking to, whether it's media or consumers or executives or other business units, a lot of times they don't see a difference between security and privacy. And frankly, there isn't a huge difference to them between security, privacy, and even safety, right? Particularly when we're talking about online experiences. So a lot of the times when hi Mickey, when I'm talking to those stakeholders, I'm talking in terms that they will understand in terms of their experience. And sometimes that means that I have to let them say security when, from a practitioner's perspective, it may be privacy. It's less important the words that they are using, and it's more important that they're understanding the concepts. Now, internally inside organizations with practitioners, it's actually important that we be able to differentiate those things for ourselves to make sure that operationally we have enough focus, enough resource, and enough attention on all of those areas. Having security and privacy as an undefined mishmash of concepts makes it very difficult to pragmatically do the tasks and fulfill their responsibilities from an organization perspective. So, and I think a lot of companies and organizations may define things a little bit differently depending on their specific business or culture. There are some companies that are very engineering focused, and so they actually have privacy engineering as kind of the lead for their privacy effort. It has a lot to do with controls and technical solutions. And then there are other companies that are less engineering heavy. And so they are really looking at privacy from perhaps a policy perspective or business model perspective, right? I actually wish more organizations would look at it from a business model perspective. But so internally within our organizations, it does matter that we have some definition just to make sure that everything is getting covered. But in my work, when I'm talking to a non-expert or somebody who just doesn't work in the space professionally, it's less important the term that they are using. And I will use the language that is comfortable and familiar to them. The one exception to that is policymakers, where it is absolutely important that we are specific and precise when we are drafting legislation. But particularly if it's a consumer audience, I'm going to use the language that they are comfortable with, regardless of whether or not that may be how we define it as practitioners.
Yeah, all good points. There's so many ways that we could go from there, but I see that Michelle just joined us. So welcome, Nikki. And Melanie and I just finished with intros, and Melanie kicked us off with, the definitions in privacy and security, the distinction. But if you don't mind, before digging into how you yourself explain the differences between privacy and security, I know you have amazing analogies. Please please introduce yourself and tell the B-Sides audience all about what you're up to and where you've been.
Yeah, definitely. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yep.
All right. So I'm calling in live from Bermuda, from the Bermuda Triangle. So it's a kind of a perfect place to talk about security and privacy. And of course, these two lovely ladies who are my frequent co-conspirators. My name is Michelle Dennedy. I've been in the privacy and security and intellectual property world since the 90s, since last century. Currently, I run the services side of my world is called Privatus. Privatus is your private self, or the individual self gliding itself through the world, and Publicus is the public side of the self, so the obligations we give to each other as a society. So at Privatus, we work on something that we call wicked privacy, which is living in the bounds of having an individual self in juxtaposition with various cultures around the world, whether we're online, offline, or beside. And exactly as Melanie was just talking about, however you call them, we call them. So if you're calling something that I would call security privacy, or if you live in China and the word privacy translates into dirty secret or shameful secret, we will talk about data protection. It's all good, unless you're a regulator, and then we're going to have words about your words. So that's my Pravada side. On the other side of myself, I'm in a stealthy startup right now. As the CEO, we're working on bringing privacy to the requirements, to the developers, to the supply chain, so that we're not surprised by all the defects in our data lifecycle and our data assets. And as Mel was just talking about, really looking at data as one of these core assets that will drive us forward into the next century. Before these roles, I've worked in a ton of infrastructure companies in, I call it the ring of fire, Sun Microsystems, Oracle, McAfee, Intel, and then my last big corporate gig was Cisco, building in requirements in businesses and doing sort of testing experiments on where does leadership lie in the privacy realm, and doing sales in this realm of who will buy and why aren't they buying. All of these experiments have really led us to where we are now, and what Lourdes is running is the rise of privacy tech. We're probably 15, 20 years behind the security world, but I don't think it's going to be 15 to 20 years until we catch up to the primacy of figuring out how do privacy and security, data asset management, data governance all work in synergy together in these soft systems. So I'm excited. Thank you for having me, and sorry that it took me a while to connect.
Thank you for that, Mickey. Well, let's complete the definitions portion so that we can then talk about the lessons that we've drawn from cybersecurity. So, Melanie was saying it doesn't really matter. You try to work with the language that they're using, unless obviously if you're working with policy makers and regulators. When it comes to the privacy tech space in general, beyond the definition, which we, as you two have been part of the rise of privacy tech, we have an endeavor to define this space, and right now at its basic simplest level, we define privacy tech as tech solutions to privacy problems. But let's talk about the types then. The biggest ones that we've been seeing are the compliance ones. When people, especially in security, talk about privacy, they think law and policy and compliance. And so a couple of the startups in this space have been mostly focusing on those. But what are the other areas? And Mickey, this is like a softball given what you're doing. What are the other types of privacy tech and other beyond compliance that you guys are excited about, that you think this InfoSec audience, the security audience might be interested in knowing more about?
Yeah, and I think so my background is as an attorney. I was trained as an attorney, and my first role as an attorney was as a patent litigator. So we were really looking at what are the monopolies that people have claim by claim to ephemeral assets. So if you think about that sort of disposition in my head of where I've been and where we're going, I think that compliance is great. I think good privacy laws hopefully will incent better behavior or make people fear consequences of bad behavior. However, if we put in the worlds of technology and law together, the way you start to study law, and Lourdes has this background as well, is you start with what? Cases, case law. And what is case law? They are user stories. User stories about things that we've already done, things that have created a case or controversy that is bad enough that we're going to waste our civic publicus time on adjudicating and creating rules around. So if there's not already a law in place, because so many people are already doing it, like killing people, if there's something new that's offensive, like you're creating an offensive odor and it's going over into someone else's farm, it doesn't feel like a physical harm. You're not burning down their farm, but that odor is coming across. The odor of your badly collected, disrespecting, and not checking in with your customers' employees, that odor has created a big enough stank that there's the beginning of enough use cases or user stories in the law to say that's not okay. Now, if that was just enough, all we would do is continue to kind of like herkily-jerkily make mistakes until we had enough user stories to really fill out what we want. So what we're trying to do is really shift to the beginning of where do the requirements begin? How are we governing? How are we setting up our teams? How are we taking in requirements? Who gets to dictate what a system looks like? Is it the user? Is it this sort of old-fashioned 1970s, the shareholder? How many meetings have we all been in where it's like, oh, well, I'd love to give you a budget for that security thing, man, but the shareholders. Like, have these people ever talked to a shareholder? No. The shareholder would probably say, yes, I would like no more ransomware. Thank you. Do something preventative. So by taking those requirements, putting them into a requirement setting strategy and having a strategy, and then having requirements for systems, and then having systems managers that understand that user stories are case law, and case law is the primordial user story, and then hacking at those things and having things like bug bounties for privacy vulns, I think that's where we're going to find some really interesting innovation going forward.
I just want to add quickly, Michelle, that because you reminded me of something, which is that in 2019, the Business Roundtable actually came out publicly to say that shareholders are no longer the purpose of corporations. So,
hello.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fact that business leaders, and I don't mean leaders who are in business, I mean leaders who are leading business as an industry and a collective group, have already said that shareholders are no longer the primary stakeholder or purpose for a corporation. And so when I hear shareholders as the reason why a security or privacy initiative cannot move forward, I mean, first I roll my eyes as discreetly as I can, but I think it's an indication of where that individual is in their own maturation as a leader and as an executive, that they don't realize that what they're saying is in fact behind the eight ball in terms of where true business leadership is headed.
Exactly, because I don't think you can find data behind that old trope. It's not even a hypothetical, it's a trope. We love our shareholders, of course we do. They own increments of our company, and that's part of the democratization of the security laws is making sure that people can own the benefits of companies. That's great, but it's not definable in terms of what do we do, what do we want to do, and here we are midway through 2021. The digital transformation has happened. I saw another CEO the other day from Fortune 50 or 20 talking about how the digital transformation was about to happen. Was anyone awake during 2020? It's happened. We're doing online telemedicine. We're doing online learning. Hello. So now that we're saying it's not what the shareholder thought they were buying and holding in 2000 because you're a blue chip stock, or it's not because I'm going to make some profit on this sort of market on hedge funds and whatever. It's because we exist as cultural artifacts within a context, as corporations, as government entities, as NGOs. And we do that because we have employees and we have customers. And this is something from my dad, from, Navy guy, mainframes, 1950s. You only have privacy concerns if you have customers or employees or citizens. And if you don't have them, cool, you don't have privacy concerns. If you do, welcome.
You both touch upon the perfect things to segue to the lessons part of this conversation. So we talked about digital transformation and shifting left in general. Can you two talk about what you're seeing in the privacy tech space in terms of shifting left, and where, how does that align with what you've seen in the past years in the AppSec space, similar conversations that we've been seeing? Do you see any similar trends, any alignments? Are they the same conversations? How are they different when it comes to shifting privacy left?
I'll start, and then Mel can pick up because she's got a broader view. I tell you what, I was whining to these ladies earlier today because there's somebody who's like talking our talk on the shift left, and I was like, oh no, has this company scooped us or what? And when I read into what they're doing, it's different than our hypothetical and how we think that we're going to add value to our customers going forward on the shift left paradigm. But I think the reality is that we've all realized there's a cluster of early companies solving early problems in compliance. We had a transparency problem because we weren't reporting swiftly enough to get in front of GDPR and other large fine-based strategies by governments. We have a mapping problem, which is just astonishing to me, because we're trying to walk up and go, hey, Lourdes, do you have any data? And she's the head of marketing, and she's like, oh, you're from legal? Oh, good Lord, no, I don't have any data. In marketing, wow. And that's how we're reporting on stuff. So the early crop of privacy tech is saying, I think the data will tell you what its structure is and where it's flowing, and there's APIs and blah, blah, blah. So there's a huge cluster of companies that are very, very helpful doing things like mapping, masking, ephemerizing data, doing differential privacy, and getting at this compliance transparency paradigm. The newer folks are getting to something that I think the VCs are a little bit wary of, but are starting to understand, which is if you get to the root cause of issues, we may have just lost Mexico. I don't know where.
It looks like we did.
She'll be back.
She'll be back.
But that's where we're going is, how are you setting up the requirements? How do you know what the requirements more? Let's start with transparency at the requirements workshops. Let's have requirements workshops. Let's bring out some of these more traditional models of data modeling, data strategy before you start to build or buy. And then tracking what's required throughout the life cycle of the build. Let's involve developers. I think my biggest pushback I've heard from the financiers in this space is that developers cannot adapt to privacy. Developers will not do anything different. And I think that's
how do they know
such
this?
a shame, right? It's very small thinking, because if you actually talk to people who develop systems, they want to do it faster, they want it to last, and they want users to use it. The last thing they want is to spend all this time building things that no one uses, or that things that the lawyers, because we never get names, do we, Lourdes? It's the lawyers,
right? Especially
say no to.
Especially in the age of we're living in a time where privacy is synonymous to product excellence. So, the conversation with developers are the ones I've been having anyway. They get it and they want to do the right thing when it comes to privacy. So I'm really surprised that some of the funders that you're talking to are just,
it's wild to me, because
it is wild.
It gives someone as creative as a developer. I mean, every software language is a language. It's creative. It's like poetry, right? It does things. It's functional. It lives. It grows. It's organic. And I think the folks that engage in that kind of practice as a profession or as a hobby, they kind of go, sometimes they go both ways, but you can hack people and sort of get a reaction out of them, which I find quite honestly sad, unless you're a white hat hacker looking for vulns to fix them. These ransomware people, I find, I feel pity for them, because wow, what talent has been lost to doing something amazing that would be a legacy. Instead, they're just kind of scumbags. But the vast majority of developers are building things that work, that last, that run, that are essential. And I think that kind of pride in your work and the ethic of work in getting your work done efficiently and well and of good quality is a matter of pride with the developer community. So shame on the investors that don't think developers can adapt or don't want to adapt. And shame on us if we don't make privacy approachable enough that they feel like they're left out.
Right, and it's not even a hard conversation to have, given developers are some of the most, innovation-minded people out there. There's so much opportunity to innovate in privacy, especially in the privacy tech space. Another lesson I want to jump into, so we talked about shifting left. We've seen that in security. We're seeing it happen in privacy tech. And so that's one of the lessons we're drawing from cybersecurity. Another one is about bridging gaps with product and cross-functional teams. I think it's even truer in privacy, given the cross-functional nature of privacy. But what can we learn from the security space when it comes to bridging these gaps with product and other cross-functional teams? Mickey, what do you think? In terms of, security is more mature. Are there things that throughout your 20-year career in security you think, we should really do more of this in privacy? This is something that we could pick up from InfoSec or cybersecurity in general.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's things, like Veracode has been out for how long, right? I mean, there's things like static analysis. There are things like understanding the syntax of sharing. Definitionally, I think Mel did a good job with this, but I want to emphasize it and underline it and write stars and glitter around it, which is privacy is not about secrecy. Privacy is not about encryption. Encryption is a wonderful tool for the type of sharing that is limited. But privacy is about sharing with respect. So when you're talking about sharing, you're talking about flow. It's either staying within my system from one app to the next, or it's sharing between vendors that serve it, or it's sharing simply between you and I. And understanding how do we create enough transparency, enough choice, enough activity, and the critical environment of timing to create that context, that we actually have a respectful conversation. And that's all any software really does, is it has a conversation either machine to machine or person to machine. And so I think once that paradigm is understood, the creativity starts to generate, and you start to realize that, sure, creating secure enclaves, important, creating the whole CIA triangle around traditional security, what's the level of confidentiality, all the rest.
Right.
But if you add to that the dimension of time and the different cultural differentials, it's like going from addition to differential equations and calculus. And once you have differential equations and calculus, you're no longer living in a 2D world. You're living in a universe. And I think that's exciting.
I think that's a perfect analogy, going from addition to differential calculus when we're talking about privacy and security. Obviously, the two overlap, but they're distinct. I love what you said about clarifying that it's not just about secrecy. Privacy is not just about secrecy. Privacy is not just about security either. Obviously, we need security for privacy, but like you said, there are other conversations about sharing and transparency that have nothing to do with security that we need to address when it comes to privacy. And even at the data level, which we were talking about personal data when it comes to privacy, whereas in security, could be all sorts of data, trade secrets, IP, the crown jewels, whatnot. I think this is a good way to kind of then, when we're talking about these things, when it comes to selling and marketing these products, what are some of the pitfalls? We've seen some of those pitfalls that CISOs share on LinkedIn about how they're being targeted by security salespeople. What are some of the pitfalls that you think we can learn from in this security space when it comes to selling and marketing privacy products? I brought up a couple of them, but are there others that come to mind, Mickey? Especially as you build your own startup, how are you guys going to market these things and sell them in a way that would resonate with privacy-minded people?
Yeah, we're now on the other side of the table, right? And so we're that annoying, like, hey, just checking in.
Right.
I think you're always going to get some of that. It's, sales are about relationships. They're about getting attention. They're about having a reason to get in the room. I helped lead a sales department at Oracle, so probably one of the most aggressive sales forward companies with, at that time, and all apologies to all Oracle players, not a lot of differentiation. It was like, hey, guess what? We still have a database. And guess what? You still have data, so you still need it. So for us to come up with a creative way to approach a customer and say, hey, how about that database, huh? It was challenging. So I don't think you're going to get away from the, hey, let's have just 15 minutes. First of all, like, you're not going to take just 15 minutes. I think that the reality is the mistakes that are often made are, one, in focusing on a title. So if you think that the person that's going to be the primary beneficiary of your product, they may be the database administrator, right? It may be that's the person you want to approach if you're selling a database. Yep. The security person feels like the right person to sell encryption and DNS and anti-ransomware and sandboxing, whatever. The reality is that some of these sales, much to the chagrin of particularly the private equity tribe, will not be a simple flatline sale anymore. We are going to see more and more horizontal sales. We're going to see more and more interoperable soft systems. So it may be that you have to spend some time with the developers asking them how they like to play and saying, not what do you want, or here's my thing, I know you want it, and I'll buy you an iPad or a laptop or a bottle of wine to get it. But instead, we'll be saying, how about having an experiment where we figure out which of these two features you like best? Which are the things that are going to help you with that kind of beautiful trifecta of maintaining your budget, speed to marketplace, getting the lawyers off my back, which sadly is universally in every single country I've done research in. Get the lawyers out of my office is like the number one complaint of developers. So we have to work on ourselves as lawyers, because obviously for something that we're doing is really making these guys allergic. But I think having the understanding that a lot of your CPOs are going to come from the legal community. Lourdes and I are freaks. So don't think that we are your target audience, because I want to hear all about your technology. I want to hear why you built it. I want to hear what you think you're competing against. I want to hear what you're replacing. Why did you take the time out of your world to create a new firewall when firewalls are old, right? So I want to hear that. Most of the lawyers out there, I shouldn't say most, many, sadly, I think most are still looking at,
absolutely.
I think most, what they're used to buying is services. They've come out of law firms. They like to buy services from law firms, either on an hourly basis or a flat fee basis per project. Getting them comfortable with buying a SaaS service over time is tricky. So if you're a CISO and you're used to understanding how do you buy a SaaS service to have maintenance monitoring stuff, or you're buying cloud bursting efforts so that you have bug bounty type programs internally or externally, you have to teach your colleagues in legal how to buy that way. So you're not giving up power by helping your C-level, C-suite person buy better. And in fact, what you're doing is you're strengthening your soft system. Instead, what I'd love to see more of is I would love to see folks saying, what are the outcomes on the business level that we would like to achieve here? Would we like to have faster time to market for sales? Great. So the metric might be, what's holding this up? I want to talk to my procurement and my contract negotiators, not necessarily the head of product lawyer. What are the things customers are asking you that are tripping you up? Is it unlimited liability because you don't know what your product does and where your product's data impacts or lives or protects, blah, blah, blah? Is it flexibility? Ask them, they'll know. Like what is the most irritating thing in anyone's email box on any given day? Figuring that stuff out and solving for that, I think, makes for a much happier sale. Ooh, yay, Melanie's back.
Yeah, we got her back. I think you're absolutely...
So that's kind of how I go for it.
You're absolutely right. And speaking of, the selling and marketing of privacy products and not all privacy pros being equal or having been created equal, what are some of the things, and Melanie, oh, we lost her again. Mickey, what are some of the things that you think privacy pros who complain about not getting the same budget that CISOs get, what are some of the things they can do to get their privacy mandates funded? Because we're talking about, most of them don't know how to do this.
Yeah,
Stop
and the reality
compliance.
is, stop saying compliance.
Yes, that's one thing.
It's like, what do you want? What's happening in your financial reporting? In the US, it's 10K report. They're telling you what they're graded on this year. What What areas are they focused on geographically? Are there laws that intersect there that will be a hindrance to sales there? What pivots are they making? So they had an interview with Pfizer's CEO. That dude probably has access to most of the world's information based on who's come and gone and gotten their vaccine and whatever. And there's going to be a lot of pressure to resell that data. So my question would be for them, before that question comes to me as a support person, whether you're a CISO or a CPO, the business seems to me moving here. How would I anonymize, shape, sell, auction, permission information in a different way? That's where I would be. And I insider ball game, happen to know some of those guys. That is what they're doing. They're very forward thinking. So you didn't hear that from me. But that's what I would be doing is forget the analogy about skating where the hockey puck is going. There's only one puck. Hard to see, but there's only one puck. What you're trying to do is predict weather patterns. You want as much data as you can, as much context as you can, and you want a lot of the information of the past, but you also want to understand that, like, in the last 3 years, look what's happened with wildfires. I'm not looking for 100 years of data. I'm looking for the last 5 years necessarily. What is predictive? How do we run experiments? How do we lean into what is present for the data for running this business? Always with your mindset of running this business is not just about generating cash or cash equivalents. Running this business means engaged employees. They're going to get more expensive, harder to get, harder to keep, and engaged and interactive customers. So that's your target. And so if you have metrics around those targets and they happen to match the geographies, the types of business, and the type of business transformations while protecting the store of your bread and butter customers and employees, you're going to have a pretty happy time. You may not get all the budget sitting in certain departments because you're a cost center, but boy, you're going to be able to share a pocket with your sales guys who will sell more, your marketing people who want to expand their reach, your communications people who have a story to tell now because you've collected that data, and so on. So I think that's how I would do that play.
Thanks for that, Mickey. I do want us to jump into comms and PR now that we have Melanie. So Mel, unless you want to, comment on some of the sales and marketing lessons that you've taken from cybersecurity and brought into the privacy tech space, you're free to do that too. I'd love to hear about some of the comms and PR lessons that you're now advising your privacy tech startups that you've drawn from your years in cybersecurity and working with InfoSec folks.
Yeah, of course. So I think first and foremost, when I think about what we've learned on the security side from a communications perspective, is that your outward story and your inward story have to be the same. There is no such thing as an internal narrative and an external narrative.
Right.
I have interviewed for jobs where I've told them that I'm going to spend the first 90 days fixing what's inside their organization before we do anything externally. And the companies that are not patient enough to do that, it's definitely a red flag that they're looking for somebody to put lipstick on a pig, which number one is something I don't do, but number two, it doesn't last very long, right? It rubs off pretty quick and people notice that the emperor is not wearing any clothes. So I think that's the first thing is it is incredibly difficult to tell a privacy story if you're not actually living it inside your organization. And we're seeing that with a lot of companies kind of venturing into the space of privacy washing, where their marketing language or their PR story makes a whole bunch of privacy claims. But fundamentally, it's not really a priority for the company other than the fact that, they're trying to avoid additional regulation, or they're thinking that perhaps it's like a temporary and cheap value add from a marketing perspective. But if it's not real, it will come back to bite you in the ass. And we've seen that with, security companies that have made all types of claims that they can't back up, right? And security learns the hard way. Yeah, security learned the hard way that you have to show your work. And that is something that we can learn now on the privacy tech side, so we don't have to learn it the hard way, right? Showing your work with every single privacy claim that you make is really important. The second thing is that those of us that are in communications roles, that are operating in this function and that claim to have some type of responsibility for reputation, or company narrative, we need to be mindful that by the time the product team comes to us to do something external, it's too late to fix the privacy problems. Now, if you're anything like me, you're still going to try, because you're at least going to document the fact that they fucked up, right? But just as Mickey is talking about moving to the left from a technical perspective, those of us who communicate about these things also need to shift our guidance and advice early on in the process, right? There should be a communications person in every single product review meeting. There should be a communications person on the engineering review documents. We need to be helping our colleagues make decisions with the advantage of knowing how things are going to land externally, right? I can very quickly off the top of my head rattle off the top dozen questions you're going to get from a journalist, a privacy advocate, a customer, a regulator, and that needs to be addressed in the development process, not after the fact. And that's why we end up with, some pretty shitty statements and responses to companies when they get called out on things, is because they truly haven't thought about it until somebody outside the company notices. And communications professionals can do a lot to help by bringing that perspective to the conversation before things get built.
Thanks for that, Mel. I know there's a lot that we can do in, when it comes to walking the privacy talk and earning credibility that way. What about your points on teaching these startups to embrace accountability and advance the field in general? I know you like to talk about those things, so I want to make sure that we share those with the audience as well.
Sure. So I will say one advantage that we have in the privacy tech space is that our community, even more so than InfoSec, if you can believe it or not, is more skeptical and more cynical. And so when you say something in the privacy space that when you make a misstep, people notice and people talk. Because the thing that I'll add is that they may not always do it publicly and to your face, but they are talking, and it is impacting your reputation, is impacting your ability to sell, and is impacting your credibility as a company and as a professional in terms of who's saying these things. And so we do have the benefit of having very, very harsh critics. And that allows, somebody like me or my team to come in and say, these are the boundaries. They have been set. These are the expectations. And so we have a lot less gray area, which is actually helpful from a communications perspective, because we can start using that shared language of the community very early on. And we have a really good sense of what that community is expecting from us before we get there. So we don't have to do a lot of iteration post-launch.
Yeah, I want to add on to this, because this is like Mel's magic for discernible. A lot of people think they understand privacy because we use words like permission and consent and respect. All of this stuff that sounds like, oh, well, I'm a human. I've had experience in the world. I know what this means. Security has had all these secret acronyms, and they're really scary, and I don't want to question them because I'm not like a security engineer. So you get this dialogue with people that are using these terms colloquially that may not be what we're trying to communicate. So if you're a privacy person, you have an even higher standard to be very clear in your communication. And the tendency when we're talking about startups, and I'm in this world right now myself, is you want to say, I'm doing everything. I'm doing this. I'm harnessing the moon. The reality is that we're taking it one step at a time. So I don't want you to undersell your business, but this is why you need a communications professional very early on in your development, because you want to tell the truth, you want to put your best foot forward, but you also want to distinguish with, I can't even speak. That's why I have communications people to help me, like Mel. I want to show people what's real.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And documenting all those steps will actually build a better story for you over time.
Right, and you don't want to turn off your potential customers by claiming all these things that you can't back up anyway. I feel like we can go on talking for another hour, but we are out of time. I do want to make sure that you guys are able to say, share last words or calls to action or wherever folks might be able to find you after this. So Nikki, any last words to the attendees, or, where can they find you online, and how should they reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm really easy to find, and I'm halfway through the limit of my angel raise, so hit me up if you've got a big check for me. I'm at Dennedy. I don't stick to privacy. I don't apologize for it. It's your privacy choice. It's my choice to share. But we do talk a lot about privacy, security, communications, all of these things. So hit me up on Twitter at Dennedy and watch this space. We're just about to come out of stealth.
Mel?
Yeah, so on Twitter you can find me at Melanie, spelled phonetically. That's how long I've been on the internet. I thought that was funny at the time. So that's the easiest place to find me. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn.
And I'm same at Lourdes Turrecha on Twitter. You can also find me on LinkedIn. You can also find me at riseofprivacytech.com or at privacytechrise on Twitter. So if you guys have questions about the emerging privacy tech landscape, please reach out to any one of us. We are very much plugged in the middle of it and very passionate about fueling this space. Thank you for tuning in. This has been a pleasure, and have a good BSides this year, you guys.
Thanks,
Next
everyone.
year, maybe in person.
Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to our Q&A session for lessons drawn from cybersecurity and the rise of privacy tech. We have with us today Melanie Ensign, Lourdes Turrecha, Turrecha, sorry, okay, and Michelle Dennedy. I think we've got a fourth contributor here that I wasn't introduced to yet. Is that, all right, who's this?
Hi, Steve. This is Steve.
Awesome. Hello, Steve. Okay, so, and also, just to check, will you all be doing the thing where you keep turning off someone's stream and turning it back on throughout the conversation here? Or is that just something you reserved for the main event? We had cameras that were going blank, we lost Mexico, etc.
I guess we'll see.
I'm not touching any more buttons, if that's your question.
Cool.
We like being spontaneous. Okay.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I definitely got the sense that this whole conversation has been a running conversation you've been having for a very long time, and we were just lucky enough to parachute kind of into the middle of it, right? Is there anything I'd love to hear you just pick it up where you were and go on, and maybe talk a little bit more about some of the lessons from you got from the gosh, sorry, my eyes are giving out. Get further into the comms and PR lessons from the cyber incidents that you're dealing with.
Sure. So I can take that as somebody who started my career in this space working on security communications before I then adopted the privacy work as well. One of the most important lessons that we learned is the technical credibility. You have to actually have substance behind what you're saying. And so as we've seen in the security space,
if you can't back up what you're talking about, you don't just miss the opportunity to build a strong reputation and get your message across. You can actually lose credibility and kind of get demerits from a reputation perspective. And the same thing is true on privacy. And we've seen, a number of companies that try to go out with pretty strong privacy claims, or at least strong positions in privacy, and can't back it up with behavior and actions. And again, it's not just that the message falls flat, it's that you're actually docked and you lose reputation points for trying to, privacy wash your way through the conversation.
Exactly. And just the same way that it's terrible for a cybersecurity company to have terrible security, it's not a good look for privacy tech startups to have bad privacy practices.
Yes, yeah, very, very much so. So yeah, it's definitely something I see a ton of conferences and things screw up, is leaking that information from the people that they have coming to talk about these very issues. And you just don't see those people come back again.
Yeah, and I think it honestly, it makes it difficult for the companies that are doing the right things when we're kind of diluting the meaning of a lot of the language and messaging around privacy because it's being used as marketing fluff rather than an honest attempt at communicating information to various stakeholders.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think.
I just wanted to check on that real quick, and privacy should not be used as new and improved. It's such a deep topic. There's so much room for innovation, which is how the three of us talk to all the time. And there are things being built today that are automating best practices. So understand how those things fit together and actually how they drive your data assets forward in your organization. And you're going to have a much richer and detailed story around your activities, and you're going to have a better marketplace for the privacy tech that is arising right now.
What's Steve think about that?
Steve thinks
Steve agrees wholeheartedly. He's kind of bored. He's done with listening to us.
He's heard this all before.
All right, well, maybe we should let Steve go then. I really, really deeply appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us and in front of us. We're very lucky to have you all. So hopefully,
thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for watching.
Thanks, guys.